$38. That's what you leave in your checking account. On purpose. Not because you have to, because you remember when you had to. You're 34 years old. Your net worth just crossed $1.1 million, and you still check the price of olive oil before it goes in the cart. Still reach for the store brand. Still run the total in your head before the register does. Old habit. Except it isn't old anymore. It's a choice. And you honestly can't tell yet whether it's the wisest thing you've ever done or the strangest evidence of how deeply your past still lives inside your decisions. You grew up in a house where money was never discussed directly. It was discussed in the silences. The way your mother went quiet when the cart declined. The way your father drove 20 extra minutes to save $4 on gas. The way the heat dropped in January and everyone pretended not to be cold. You absorbed none of it as explicit lessons. You absorbed it as atmosphere. Money was tight, then fine, then tight again, and your nervous system learned to treat every number as something that could disappear without warning. At 22, your first real paycheck is $1,840 after taxes, and $200 goes to savings before anything else. Not because anyone taught you to, but because the fear of zero is louder than the desire for anything. You eat rice. You take the bus. You decline invitations that cost money and tell people you're tired. You're not tired. You're calculating. Here's the wiring diagram nobody hands you. The habits built when you have nothing are the ones that remain when you have everything. Not because they're comfortable, because they're deeply embedded. Scarcity doesn't just shape what you buy, it shapes what feels safe. At 26, savings hit $11,000. 5 figures for the first time in your life, and you check the balance every morning. Not from anxiety, but from disbelief. Same apartment, same car, same grocery store, same $7 lunch. Around you, friends are upgrading apartments and financing cars and taking vacations they'll still be paying off in spring, and watching them, you feel something complicated. Not jealousy, something closer to disbelief. So you start reading. Not motivation, actual research. And you find Thomas Stanley and William Danko, 2 academics who spent 20 years studying American millionaires and shocked everyone with where they found them. Not the neighborhoods you'd expect. Middle-class streets, used cars, sale racks. 64% of millionaires drive cars more than 3 years old. Half have never spent more than $400 on a suit. 82% use coupons or wait for sales. You read this, and something finally clicks into place. Not validation of your behavior, but an explanation of the behavior of people decades ahead of you on the road. There was a man in Brattleboro, Vermont, who made the finding flesh. Ronald Reed pumped gas and worked as a janitor at JCPenney his whole life. He wore a flannel coat held together with a safety pin. Regulars at the coffee shop occasionally bought his breakfast, assuming he couldn't manage it. When he died in 2014, at 92, his estate was valued at almost $8 million. Decades of dividend stocks held quietly in a safe deposit box. Most of it left to the local library and hospital. The town was stunned. The math wasn't. The math had been running the whole time, in a flannel coat, in plain sight, invisible. The lesson wasn't that wealth hides, it was that wealth often looks ordinary because its purpose is not to be seen. At 29, net worth $87,000. A raise arrives, $14,000 a year, and you change nothing. Not the apartment, not the car, not the store. The entire raise is redirected into index funds. Your coworker gets the same raise and leases a BMW. You say nothing. You do the math quietly, which is where you do all your math. Because lifestyle inflation was never a decision anyone makes. It's a default, the setting the system ships with. Leave your expenses unattended, and they will rise automatically to meet whatever you earn. The car note, the bigger apartment, the $12 subscription nobody cancels. They compound, not in your favor. And the default spares no income bracket. That's the part that should genuinely disturb you. A 2025 Goldman Sachs report found that 40% of households earning $500,000 or more still describe themselves as living paycheck to paycheck. Not broke, consumed. Spending expanded to swallow every dollar. Income went up. The anxiety never came down, because the lifestyle grew faster than the wealth. You file that statistic somewhere permanent. At 32, net worth $240,000, 2 promotions in. You still drive the car you bought at 27, a 2012 Toyota Camry, 91,000 miles, a scratch on the rear bumper you've never fixed. People at work quietly assume you're struggling. You let them. There's an unexpected freedom in being underestimated. Nobody expects you to pick up the check, lead the group vacation, or bankroll a cousin's restaurant. You move through the world without a visible price tag. And the money moves even more quietly than you do. Somewhere in here, the last thread to appearances snaps. You stop caring what the lifestyle looks like from the outside and care only about what it's quietly becoming on the inside. Which is how, at 34, the million arrives on a Tuesday, somewhere between answering emails and reheating leftovers. The brokerage updates. The number is there. You look at it, close the app, and finish eating. Not the moment you'd imagined. You'd expected arrival. What you got was confirmation. Something you already knew was true, finally captured in a number. Because a million was never a destination. It's a proof of concept, evidence that the system works, the frugality, the patience, the index funds, the refusal to interrupt. The only real question the milestone asks is whether you now shut the system down or let it keep running. You let it run. But a new discomfort surfaces at this altitude, one nobody had described. You start noticing the gap between what you could spend and what you do. The nicer car you could buy, the neighborhood you could move to, the olive oil you could stop pricing. And you keep choosing not to, day after day, until you begin to wonder whether something is wrong with you. Whether the habits that built the wealth are now just habits outliving their original purpose. Whether the broke kid ever actually left the building. Then comes the dinner. A friend of a friend, someone from finance, a restaurant at $300 a plate. You watch the table order without glancing at prices. The conversation is second homes and renovation timelines and private school waitlists. And you sit there, quietly eating a $300 piece of fish, entertaining the genuine statistical possibility that the man to your left is servicing $80,000 in credit card debt to maintain an image you aren't even attempting. You don't say it. You smile, you drink the water, because you have learned the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, the person who looks richest is simply the person spending the most aggressively. Because visible wealth and actual wealth are, almost always, two different inventories. The louder someone performs money, the more likely they're borrowing against a future that doesn't exist yet. Real wealth runs silent. The people who hold it stopped needing to display it so long ago, they've forgotten display was ever the custom. At 38, net worth $1.9 million, and a new job at $310,000 a year. And your first thought is not what to buy, it's where to send it. 60% of every paycheck is automated into the brokerage before it can touch the checking account you actually look at. The remainder funds a life that has barely changed. Same neighborhood, finally a newer car. A used 2021 Subaru Outback, paid in cash, negotiated hard. The dealer visibly assuming you couldn't afford the lot. You let him assume. Assumptions are free, and they've quietly working in your favor for years. And here the whole thing inverts into its final shape. The broke mindset was never the problem. The broke mindset, when paired with a high income, is the blueprint. What poor people do out of necessity, wealthy people do by design. Same behaviors, different fuel. At 43, $3.2 million, most of it in index funds, and a rental property bought at 36 that pays $2,100 a month and asks almost nothing in return. Nearly no one in your life knows the figure, not from shame, but from experience. You've watched what disclosure does. The asks begin, the assumptions shift, friendships hollow. Family dynamics bend in ways that never fully straighten. People stop seeing a person and start seeing a number. So you stay unpriced. Fidelity's research would file you accurately. 86% of millionaires describe themselves as disciplined and frugal. Not the champagne crowd, just people who made the same quiet choices over and over for decades. You've been in that 86% since you were 22. You just didn't have the balance sheet yet. The strange part is that the habits that once looked like limitations slowly became the habits that created freedom. At 47, $4.7 million, you still rotate the same 3 restaurants, still clip digital coupons, still fly coach when the fare gap isn't worth it. Not from inability, because the habit costs nothing and saves something. And you've watched long enough to know that small leaks compound with exactly the same math as small investments. Just pointed the other way. At a birthday dinner, someone finally asks the question directly. Why don't you just enjoy your money? You think about it honestly, and the answer surfaces fully formed. You do. Just not in the currency they mean. You enjoy the optionality, the fact that you could stop working tomorrow and nothing would collapse. That you don't need this job, or the next one, or anyone's approval. That's what the frugality purchased. Not a car, not a watch. Freedom from needing anything from anyone, which is the only luxury good that actually appreciates. Because the broke mindset, you finally understand, was never about deprivation. It was about control. The wealthy version of you simply kept the control and added the capital. At 51, $6.1 million. The portfolio and the rental cover your entire lifestyle twice over. You could stop tomorrow. You don't. You like the work. But the morning you first ran that calculation was the quietest, most significant morning of your life. You made coffee. You sat by the window. You told no one, which by now is tradition. Warren Buffett still lives in the Omaha house he bought in 1958 for $31,500. Still stops at McDonald's. Still keeps the routines he kept while building the first million. Not because he can't change, but because the routine is the point. The discipline is the identity. And Ingvar Kamprad, who built IKEA into a global empire, few economy, drove an aging Volvo, haggled at flea markets, and channeled the bulk of his billions into foundations rather than himself. Nobody who passed either man on the street would have guessed the number. That perhaps is the fine lesson. Real wealth is not the ability to look expensive. It is the ability to stop needing anyone to notice, which is the rule the whole genre keeps rediscovering. The people who look the richest are rarely the wealthiest, and the wealthiest are almost always the ones you'd never suspect. The man in the faded jacket at the corner table, the woman in the 10-year-old Honda who owns the commercial building across the street. They retired from the performance so long ago, they've forgotten it was ever expected. At 57, net worth $8.4 million. You're in the grocery store, reaching for the store brand pasta sauce when you notice the person behind you. Rushed, phone out, shoes that cost $600, faintly stressed. And you realize, with something like affection, that you cannot tell. $38 in checking or $8 million in a brokerage. It doesn't show. It has never shown. That's the entire secret, and it fits in a sentence. The number never appears on the outside. The world sees the purchase. It rarely sees the balance sheet behind it. Then, one gray afternoon, you finally sit down with a lawyer to draft the estate documents. The library, the hospital, the scholarship fund, the quiet Ronald Reed architecture of it all. He works through the asset schedule with professional calm until he reaches the total, and then he stops, reads it again, glances up at the flannel-adjacent coat, the drugstore reading glasses, the 15-year-old watch, and back down at the page. You watch him do it, the addition, the rechecking, the silent recalculation, the refusal of the numbers to match the person. You've been doing that exact math your whole life, at the register, at the kitchen table, in the silences. It's a strange pleasure, at last, to sit on the other side of it. For decades, people underestimated what they could not see. Now you understand that invisibility was never a weakness. It was the strategy. Is this figure current? He asks. Give or take, you say. $38.